Daniel Harper never imagined that an ordinary Tuesday morning would become the dividing line between his old life and a new, confusing reality. The day began quietly in his Portland home, sunlight slipping through the kitchen window while he prepared coffee before work. His wife Emily had already left early for her job at a design firm, leaving behind a handwritten note on the counter reminding him to buy milk. It was the kind of small detail that defined their marriage: simple routines, gentle care, and a life built slowly over 8 steady years. Daniel smiled at the note, unaware it would be the last normal moment he would experience for a long time. His phone rang just as he sat down. The number was unfamiliar, and something about that alone made his chest tighten. When he answered, a calm but urgent voice introduced herself as a nurse from St. Vincent Medical Center. Emily had collapsed at work and was being treated in the emergency department. The nurse assured him she was stable, but Daniel barely heard the rest. His mind emptied, replaced by a single wave of fear. Within minutes, he grabbed his keys and drove faster than he ever had, barely noticing traffic lights or passing streets. The hospital felt cold and unreal. Machines beeped softly while doctors explained medical complications that sounded technical and distant. Emily was conscious but weak, her smile faint when she saw him. Relief rushed through Daniel. Yet it was followed immediately by worry when doctors explained she would need extended care and observation. Recovery would take weeks, maybe longer. She wouldn't be coming home anytime soon. That night, Daniel returned to an empty house for the first time since their marriage began. Silence filled every room. Emily's shoes sat near the door, her favorite blanket folded on the couch, half-read novel resting on the coffee table. The stillness felt heavy, almost unnatural. He tried to cook dinner, but lost his appetite after 2 bites. Even the ticking clock sounded louder than usual. Sleep refused to come easily, and when it finally did, it was shallow and restless. The following afternoon brought another unexpected change. A car pulled into the driveway just as Daniel returned from the hospital. Margaret Collins stepped out, carrying 2 suitcases and wearing the same composed expression she always had at family gatherings. Emily's mother lived several hours away, and Daniel hadn't expected her so soon. "I came as fast as I could," she said warmly, pulling him into a brief, reassuring hug. "You shouldn't go through this alone." Daniel felt immediate relief. Margaret had always been kind, but somewhat distant during holidays, the type of person who observed more than she spoke. Now, however, she moved with quiet certainty, as if she already knew what needed to be done. Within an hour, groceries were unpacked, fresh soups simmered on the stove, and a sense of order returned to the house. At first, Daniel simply appreciated the help. His days became a cycle of work, hospital visits, and exhaustion. Margaret filled the gaps effortlessly. She prepared meals before he realized he was hungry. She organized Emily's medical paperwork into neat folders. She even reminded Daniel to rest when he forgot to take care of himself. The house slowly regained warmth, though Emily's absence remained deeply felt. Margaret played soft music while cleaning, opened curtains each morning to let sunlight in, and watered plants Daniel had nearly forgotten existed. Small changes began appearing: new cushions on the couch, rearranged shelves, a brighter lamp replacing the dim one in the living room. Each adjustment seemed practical, yet together they subtly transformed the space. Daniel noticed how calm everything felt when he came home now. Instead of silence, there was conversation. Instead of loneliness, there was presence. Evenings often ended at the dining table with tea or coffee. Margaret shared stories about Emily as a child, how she loved drawing on every surface she could find, how she once insisted on rescuing a stray dog during a snowstorm, how determined she had always been. Daniel listened with genuine interest, realizing how many parts of his wife's past he had never fully known. One evening, after a long hospital visit, Daniel arrived home visibly drained. Emily had seemed tired and distant, overwhelmed by medication and recovery. The brief conversations they once enjoyed were now replaced with reassurances and medical updates. He felt helpless watching her struggle. Margaret noticed immediately. She handed him a warm cup of tea and sat across from him without speaking for a moment. "You don't always have to be strong," she said gently. The words caught him off guard. Daniel realized no one had asked how he felt since the crisis began. Friends sent messages asking about Emily, coworkers offered sympathy, but no one focused on him. For the first time, he admitted how scared he was, scared of losing normal life, scared of failing Emily, scared of the uncertainty ahead. Margaret listened carefully, never interrupting. Her calm presence made it easy to talk, easier than he expected. When the conversation ended, Daniel felt lighter, though he couldn't explain why. Days turned into weeks, and routines formed naturally. Daniel and Margaret coordinated hospital visits, shared meals, and discussed plans for Emily's return home. Their conversations expanded beyond Emily work frustrations, childhood memories, favorite movies, and dreams they once had but rarely spoke about anymore. Daniel began to notice how attentive Margaret was. She remembered small details, like how he preferred his coffee or which news topics interested him. She encouraged him when work felt overwhelming and reassured him when medical updates seemed discouraging. It wasn't romantic or inappropriate. It simply felt comforting, like having someone who understood the weight he carried. Still, something inside Daniel felt unfamiliar. He started looking forward to coming home, not just to rest, but to talk. The house felt less like a place of waiting and more like a shared space of understanding. One rainy evening, after returning late from the hospital, Daniel paused at the doorway and listened to Margaret humming softly while washing dishes. The warm light from the kitchen spilled into the hallway, creating a peaceful scene that contrasted sharply with the stress of the hospital environment. For a brief moment, he felt calm. Then guilt followed immediately. Emily was still in recovery, depending on him emotionally. Yet here he was, finding comfort elsewhere, even if unintentionally. He pushed the thought away, convincing himself it was only gratitude. But emotional shifts rarely announce themselves clearly. They grow quietly, hidden inside ordinary moments. Margaret continued helping, sometimes anticipating Daniel's needs before he spoke. She encouraged him to rest more, to eat properly, to take breaks from constant worry. Her care felt sincere, almost protective. Daniel realized she was also struggling in her own way, worried for her daughter, far from her own home, trying to keep everything together. Their shared concern for Emily created a bond neither of them planned. One night, as they reviewed hospital paperwork together, their hands briefly brushed while reaching for the same document. Both pulled back instantly, the moment small but strangely noticeable. Neither mentioned it, yet a subtle awareness lingered afterward. Daniel went to bed uneasy, questioning feelings he didn't fully understand. Nothing had happened. Yet he sensed an invisible boundary slowly forming, one that required attention before it became something else. The next morning at the hospital, Emily smiled weakly and asked about home. Daniel described Margaret's cooking and how organized everything had become. Emily looked relieved, grateful her mother was helping. Daniel smiled back, but inside he felt conflicted. The comfort restoring his daily life also reminded him how easily emotional distance could grow during difficult times. As weeks passed, Daniel realized something important. Loneliness doesn't always come from being alone. Sometimes it appears when life changes faster than the heart can adjust. And without noticing exactly when it happened, he began relying on Margaret's presence not just for help, but for emotional balance. Standing in the quiet living room one evening, Daniel understood that the house was no longer simply waiting for Emily's return. It was changing everyone inside it. What he didn't yet realize was that the real challenge ahead wouldn't be Emily's recovery. It would be understanding where comfort ends and loyalty truly begins. The weeks that followed felt strangely balanced between hope and uncertainty. Emily's condition improved slowly, but recovery was not as quick as Daniel had expected. Each hospital visit brought small progress, a stronger smile, longer conversations, the ability to sit up without assistance, yet doctors continued, reminding him that healing required patience. Daniel nodded every time, though patience had never been his strength. What weighed on him most was the growing distance between the life he shared with Emily at the hospital and the life waiting for him at home. At home. Routines had settled into a quiet rhythm shaped largely by Margaret. She woke early, brewed coffee, and planned meals with thoughtful care. The house stayed clean, calm, and organized. Daniel no longer returned to silence, but to warm lights and gentle conversation. After long days, that stability felt comforting, almost necessary. One evening, heavy rain covered Portland in gray mist. Traffic crawled, and Daniel arrived home late, tired from work and emotionally drained after watching Emily struggle through physical therapy. Margaret noticed immediately. Without asking questions, she placed dinner on the table and sat across from him while he ate. "You're carrying too much alone," she said softly. Daniel hesitated before answering. "I just want things to go back to normal." Margaret nodded, understanding more than his words revealed. She spoke about how illness changes not only the patient, but everyone around them. Her voice carried experience, years of raising Emily alone after her husband passed away. Years of learning how responsibility could quietly reshape a person for the first time. Daniel saw her not only as his mother-in-law, but as an individual with her own history of loneliness and strength. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from memories to hopes, from worries to small jokes meant to lighten the mood. The rain outside seemed to seal the moment, creating a peaceful space where both of them could briefly forget fear. Nothing inappropriate happened. Yet the emotional closeness deepened. Daniel felt understood in a way he hadn't expected. Margaret listened without judgment, offering calm reassurance instead of advice. That difference mattered more than he realized. Over the next few days, Daniel began noticing subtle changes within himself. He found comfort in their evening talks. He shared thoughts he hadn't voiced even to close friends, doubts about being strong enough, fears about the future, and guilt for occasionally wishing life felt easier again. Margaret never criticized him. She simply reminded him that vulnerability did not mean failure. Meanwhile, hospital visits grew emotionally complicated. Emily remained loving, but often exhausted. Medication left her sleepy, and conversations sometimes faded into silence. Daniel reassured her constantly, yet he felt helpless watching her struggle. Leaving the hospital each night filled him with sadness he carried home. One afternoon, Emily squeezed his hand and said, "You've been doing so much. Mom told me how well you're managing everything." Daniel smiled, but her words stirred unexpected discomfort. He realized Margaret had become a bridge between their separate worlds, the home Emily couldn't see and the recovery Daniel couldn't fully control. That realization unsettled him. Later that evening, a neighborhood power outage darkened the house. Candles replaced electric lights, casting soft shadows across the living room. Rain tapped against the windows again, creating a quiet atmosphere that felt almost suspended outside time. Daniel and Margaret sat on opposite sides of the couch, wrapped in silence at first. Without distractions, conversation turned deeper. "It's strange," Margaret said thoughtfully. "When someone you love is sick, you forget to notice your own feelings." Daniel admitted he often felt invisible, as though his role was only to stay strong. Speaking the truth out loud brought relief but also awareness. He recognized how much he had come to rely on these conversations. A long pause followed. Both understood the emotional weight in the room. Daniel suddenly felt uneasy. Nothing had crossed a physical boundary. Yet he sensed how easily emotional reliance could become something else if left unchecked. The comfort he felt was real, but so was his commitment to Emily. That night he barely slept. Thoughts circled endlessly. Gratitude toward Margaret, concern for Emily, and a growing understanding that emotional loyalty required attention, not assumption. The next morning at the hospital, Emily looked brighter than usual. She laughed at one of his stories and spoke excitedly about coming home soon. Watching her smile reminded Daniel why they had built their life together. Memories rushed back, road trips through Oregon, late-night pizza dinners. Shared dreams about starting a family someday. Clarity arrived quietly. He realized that while hardship had drawn him closer to Margaret emotionally, his heart still belonged with Emily. The comfort he experienced at home came from shared stress, not destiny. Recognizing that difference felt both relieving and painful. That evening, Daniel returned home determined to reset boundaries before confusion caused harm. Margaret noticed his serious expression immediately. They sat at the dining table, the same place where countless supportive conversations had happened. Daniel spoke carefully, choosing honesty over avoidance. "You've helped more than I can ever explain," he began. "But I think I've started leaning on you too much emotionally. Emily needs me fully present, not divided." Margaret listened quietly, her expression gentle rather than surprised. After a moment, she smiled softly. "I was waiting for you to realize that," she admitted. "Care can sometimes feel like closeness. But your place is beside Emily." There was no anger, only understanding. Both recognized that their connection had formed during vulnerability, not intention. A shared challenge had created emotional warmth. But wisdom required stepping back before lines blurred further. Within a few days, Margaret prepared to return to her own home. She left behind organized cabinets, labeled medical schedules, and meals stored neatly in the freezer. The house felt quieter again, yet not empty. Daniel sensed a healthier balance returning. Before leaving, Margaret hugged him warmly. "Take care of each other," she said. "That's what matters." When Emily was finally discharged weeks later, Daniel waited outside the hospital entrance with flowers. Seeing her walk slowly toward him filled him with renewed appreciation. The journey ahead would still require patience. But they would face it together at home. Emily noticed small changes: the brighter walls, rearranged furniture, and peaceful atmosphere. Daniel explained everything honestly, focusing on gratitude rather than emotional confusion. Emily smiled, touched by the effort both he and her mother had made. Life did not instantly return to normal.